Greetings, YouTube. A friend of mine were having a conversation about the difference between loyalty and pushing a political agenda. Now, what am I talking about? I'm talking about things like the Gamergate crowd theoretically being upset with the whole concept that SJWs and feminists are ruining gaming by wanting to see diversity in their games, something other than main characters that are all white dudes. Or people getting upset about comic books that are showing diversity, a female Thor, for example, or a black um, girl being Iron Man, or an Asian Hulk. And you see it in uh, television series as well. It's everywhere. The idea that diversity is somehow spoiling the fandom of the world. All these different types of media are being spoiled by showing diversity, which is reality. A pure white world without diversity, that's the hothouse snowflake protected space. That is not reality. That is a false image. Now, there are really people out there that are upset about this, honestly and sincerely, but they're probably a really small percentage. They're right up there with the crowd that is like, who believe that professional wrestling is real. There are people who believe professional wrestling is real, or at least it's real for them. You've probably seen the dude in that little video clip. Um, but they're a vanishingly small percentage. I think a much larger percentage of people who are claiming to be upset at diversity are in actuality using this topic at hand to push their political agenda, often which is a political agenda of toxic masculinity and the patriarchy, with misogyny and sexism, harassment and assault being their favorite topics. Or it could be racism. They're white supremacist pushing a white supremacist narrative. Or xenophobia. They're Christians trying to push the narrative that the other, usually in America or the West, it's Muslims, but it could be the other can be anybody in the world. Social conservatism is at the heart of this issue, and it is a wonderfully flexible way of thinking. Um, it creates the mindset where the past is mutable, even though the past isn't. It'll push narratives that, like, the Civil War in America was about states' rights when it was about the preservation of slavery. Um, it'll change the narratives like there were no dark people in Europe, and then there were, or the Native Americans, they were savages and they should have been civilized, and we just tried to extinguish them for the most part. We tried to eradicate them in every way, shape, and form. Their language, their culture, everything, their religion, all of it, because the Europeans that came to America were monstrously immoral and were willing to do anything to take someone else's property and land. Um, but all of these things are the politics that are being pushed in different directions. It depends on the topic at hand. And the loyalty to these fandoms is actually just the current arena that is being used, because these reprehensible individuals, some purely trolls, some white supremacists and xenophobes and transphobes and homophobes and misogynists, they've discovered that all these different arenas are available to them if they just pretend that they're part of the fandom, if they just pretend that they're upset at something, that in actuality they're just applying their politics to the topic at hand. And I think that this is prevalent everywhere, and it's becoming more common as the racists and the white supremacists and the xenophobes and the homophobes and transphobes and misogynists discover that the more arenas that they can put their politics into, the more it will normalize their politics, because you just overwhelm people. Because if you look everywhere you look, you see white supremacist narratives even more than we already do now, because they've put it into arenas where traditionally they weren't represented overtly. It was all implied, it was all subtle, or subtler, and now it's becoming overt. They're trying to flood the world with this miasma of vile, toxic narratives. Why? Because again, it normalizes it. People just come to think, oh, well, we're just going to push that Overton window a little bit further in that direction, and it just becomes the norm. People just accept the fact that, oh, well, opinions are opinions. And no, if one opinion says we need to have our media represent the world, and another narrative says we need to extinguish these human beings, those are not balanced equal positions. One is a positive, progressive view that represents the actual world, and the other is horrible. It is a plan to extinguish people, at least from their fandoms and from public representation. In some cases, they physically want to exterminate these people. Those are not equal positions at all. And anyone who says, well, opinions are opinions and we got to listen to both sides. No, you don't have to listen to both sides. You never have to listen to a white supremacist. You never have to listen to a misogynist or a homophobe or a transphobe or a xenophobe. You know what they're going to say. You've heard it before. It's old news. Don't give them the space. Don't let them sit and camp in your fandom. Tell them to go away. If all else fails, ignore them so they don't get the attention they so deeply crave. Because if we keep feeding them, they're going to stay. Have you ever heard the old saying, there's two wolves? The wolf of positivity and the wolf of negativity? Which one do you feed? Right now I'm having a hard time with that myself, but I'm going to try to feed the wolf of positivity. I'm going to try to feed the one that will help move us forward, even in the face of my own personal anger. And if we all do that, we'll be better off. And if we are aware that there are politics being imposed into our fandoms, it'll become easier to see them, easier to extract them, easier to ignore them, easier to enjoy our media without the toxic narratives that are being imposed.